Hello and welcome to this revision video for CIPS Level 4 Diploma in Procurement and Supply. And this is the 2023 syllabus for Level 4 Module 1, Scope and Influence of Procurement and Supply. And we're looking at Learning Outcome 3 today, which is to understand and analyse aspects of organisational infrastructure that shape the scope of procurement and the supply chain functions. So just to recap the 4 learning outcomes, we are focusing on number 3 today. That's broken down into 4 sub-learning outcomes. So 3.1, we'll look at explaining aspects of corporate governance impacting on procurement and supply chain functions. And then we'll look at the impact of organisational policies and procedures on procurement and supply. At 3.3, we'll look at the different structures of procurement. And 3.4, the common IT systems that can be used by a procurement and supply chain function. So on 3.1, what we'll cover is conflicts of interest, the need for documented policies, procedures in procurement, accountability and reporting for procurement roles, code of ethics, and the CIPS code of conduct and the ILO, and CIPS code of conduct right at the end as well. So corporate governance refers to the way in which companies are governed and to what purpose. It identifies who has power and accountability and who makes decisions. It is, in essence, a toolkit that enables management and the board to deal more effectively with the challenges of running a company. Corporate governance ensures that the businesses have an appropriate decision-making process and control in place so that the interests of all their stakeholders, which are shareholders, employees, customers, etc., are balanced. So governance at a corporate level include the processes through which a company's objectives are set and pursued in the context of social, regulatory and market environments. So it's concerned with practices and procedures for trying to make sure that a company is run in such a way that it achieves its objectives whilst also ensuring that stakeholders can have confidence and trust that their company is well founded. But good governance is important because it provides us with the infrastructure to improve the quality of our decision-making by those who manage our business. And good quality ethical decision-making will build sustainable businesses, enabling them to create longer-term value more effectively. So ethics are the set of rules that govern the behaviour of a person, and that's established by a group or a culture, whereas values refers to the beliefs for which a person has an enduring preference. And in the world of intense competition, every business entity work on certain principles and beliefs that are nothing but values. Likewise, ethics is implemented in organisations to ensure the protection of the interests of their stakeholders. So one thing we want to look at is conflicts of interest. So these are potential risks for any individual working in procurement, but the governance framework should also put policies and procedures in place to prevent that conflict from arising. And if they do, you have a mechanism for managing it. So this approach is also called the 4D model. So it gives such an option. It starts with the disclosure of a potential conflict. We're going to look at that in a second, and it kind of then tells you how you can deal with it with 3 progressive levels. So when we talk about conflicts of interest, we're talking about a situation where your personal involvement within an organisation might include multiple interests that could potentially influence decisions in favour of your own gain, or giving preferential treatment to suppliers that you like or your family or friends. And often when public duty conflicts with private interests, you could have a situation if a supplier, say, offers you hospitality, or if your partner or family member is working for one of the supplying organisations. But as you can see on the screen, here are some of the examples of conflicts of interest. Maybe you having a close friend or family that's a procurement manager, having a relationship with a subordinate or a supplier, a buyer awarding a contract to a family member, creating a rival organisation to the one in which the person is employed to do, and accepting payment from a supplier for exchange of information, or accepting hospitality or gifts in return for being awarded a contract. So conflicts of interest will present themselves in two ways. You can have an actual conflict, which occurs when your personal, your professional judgment affects the personal decision. So you've actually allowed it to get in the way. Whereas sometimes it's just a perceived conflict where someone might think that of you, but not necessarily, you haven't necessarily done anything along those lines. So here are some of the questions that you could ask yourself. If you want to sort of identify if the thing that you're sort of mulling over in your head is actually a conflict of interest, you have to ask yourself, firstly, will I gain financially in addition to my usual pay? Do I have any personal relationships with colleagues or suppliers? Am I doing an identical role for a competitor? And should I disclose any of my concerns? So if the answer to any of these questions is yes, then you absolutely should disclose the concerns, because there's always something you can do about it. So the 4D model, as I mentioned earlier, is a tool that can address conflict of interests. It says they can be disclosed, or the individual can distance themselves from the contract. Apparently, if this is not possible, the contract should be delegated and entrusted to somebody other than the person who has the contract or the conflict, sorry. And typically it might be someone who is lower level than the person that's doing it. Or you can disassociate from the contract completely. But most organisations would prohibit staff from participating in the preparation, negotiation, and management, or even the enforcement of a contract if they had a relevant interest, or they'd require them to disclose or otherwise manage that before participating in that function. Now, potential conflicts of interest need to be disclosed and addressed at the earliest opportunity to make sure that no unethical behaviour occurs and that the organisational code of ethics is not breached. They are quite common in procurement. There's no need to feel ashamed that you have a conflict of interest. It's just better to disclose them so they can be handled appropriately rather than attempting to conceal them, because that's where you find you've potentially got a perceived conflict, not an actual one. And as long as any of the actual or perceived conflicts is made known through the appropriate channels, there's no need for you to be concerned. Now, the component elements of a governance framework for procurement will cascade down from the external requirements, such as legislation and regulations and objectives based on organisational strategies and requirements. Now, the working methods at the bottom of this pyramid are the ultimate outcome for the framework and are what we see and experience, but will only be compliant if the higher level stages are in place. So the set of standards and objectives within the organisation and legislation and regulations will cascade down to us at the operational level. So the policies will be developed to deliver these objectives, which will then create the operating procedures from which the day-to-day working methods will be derived. Now, within procurement, there is always going to be a need for documented policies and procedures. And here we can see what their purpose are. So firstly, it's to ensure conformance and compliance. It's to protect from coercion, bribery, and fraud. It protects organisations in terms of reputation, but also continuity of supply as well. It promotes efficiency, ethical behaviour, and it provides references that can be used by professionals who are trying to validate a process. It assists in audit procedures and processes as well, and it aids with any legal cases that subsequently might, come out as a result of somebody trying to, claim against a business. So this shows what procurement can look like when it fits into an organisational structure. And if a company is large, then often means that the enterprise has a number of departments such as marketing, sales, purchasing, accounts, and so on. And relationships between the departments are well developed, and a lot of employees are involved in each of those departmental activities. There could be higher levels of spend and greater profits that are received. But usually these sorts of enterprises are involved in a number of projects and related activities, both short-term and long-term. So it will need to have a robust team of professionals to manage their procurement activities. Now, this shows you how procurement then can be structured. And what you can see here is different roles or different people doing different roles, which actually helps with separation of duties, which means the person doing the sourcing wouldn't be doing the quality control, because I suppose if you could do both things, there's always that risk that you are signing something off that perhaps somebody else would have seen in a different light. So it just protects you, I suppose, from being accused of any wrongdoing. Because accountability in procurement essentially means having responsibility for our actions and decisions and having the obligations to report and answer to a designated oversight entity on the consequences of those actions and decisions. Now, in the public sector and private servant procurement practitioners and others involved in public procurement, they are going to be accountable and therefore exposed to any sanctions as a remedy. And that's if any behaviours contravene the public procurement legal framework and principles. So procurement and supply structures should be congruent with the overall organisation or the enterprise of which procurement is part of, and are determined to some degree by the organisation's internal and external environment. These structures may include a supply chain or procurement and supply director with layers of management, buyers, stock controllers, and administrators. So in terms of like the procurement roles, there are different levels of competencies that we see. This actually comes from the CIPS competency framework. So they've basically said there are 5 levels of competence that start with the tactical level, so the lower end of the spectrum, where you've got sort of very administrative tasks like purchase order administrators, contract administrators, inventory planners, etc. When you get to the operational level, you're starting to see buyers and procurement specialists and analysts. Managerial, you start to see senior buyers or category managers and things like that. And then when you get to the professional, we see sort of strategic procurement, senior category managers or category leads, maybe supply chain managers, head of, etc. And the advanced professionals is where you start to see procurement directors and heads of sourcing or heads of procurement, chief procurement officers. So an effective reporting cycle, which requires a regular program of data collection, communication and response, should benefit all reporting organisations, both internally and externally. Because effective reporting results in increased understanding of any risks and opportunities, and it influences longer-term management strategies and policies, as well as any business plans. It will increase accountability, streamline processes, reduce costs, and improve your efficiency, as well as benchmarking and assessing the performance and avoidance of poor practice. So you can see here, it says, there's defined clear roles and promoting team leadership, promoting a sense of ownership, freedom, control, but support and ownership, and not focusing on negatives, but trying to embrace the positives. So within procurement, accountability relates to things like conforming to the CIPS Code of Conduct or complying with any ethical policies and procedures and reports any concerns or poor practices. It also refers to conducting supplier appraisals fairly and transparently, therefore awarding contracts to the most suitable and cost-effective supplier. Managing spend to keep within budget constraints and reporting any budget variances, and ensuring that specifications are representative of the need, addressing concerns or reporting on potential areas of concern. So procurement managers must conduct their business practices in the most ethical manner, because failing to abide by ethical practices can lead to immoral and illegal practices. And these are things like bribery, favoritism, illegal sourcing, and so on. So the immediate reaction of the idea of unsatisfactory procurement ethics is that it will be quite damaging for your public relations. Because if those ethics become public knowledge, leaders have to make sure that actions are taken to follow proper ethics, because this is going to contribute to the success of a business. So it captures things like, human rights, bribery and coercion, fair trade, the environment, signing up to, conventions like the International Labour Organization or the Ethical Trade Initiative, and, being mindful of modern day slavery. And as you can see from the slide, it talks about the fact that, ethics in procurement is really about having rules that apply to our behaviour and conduct, as well as any rules and regulations. It's about moral principles within conduct of research, as well as ethical values and practices. So obviously you've got the CIPS Code of Conduct, which is for us as CIPS members, which I'm going to show you in a second. But even for those that aren't CIPS members, a business will probably have their own version of a code of ethics. So the sorts of things that are covered in a code of ethics is the values. So values could be things like working fairly, impartially, and transparently to promote honesty, respect, and integrity. Then you've got the principles of how an organisation intends to meet its values. For example, is it customer satisfaction? Is it meeting ISO standards, continuous improvement? And actually, sometimes the CSR policies are referred to here as well. You've then got your personal responsibility, which is how each individual is responsible for making sure the code is upheld, because individuals are going to be responsible for reporting breaches to to their line manager. Compliance might be to do with standards or policies. And as I said earlier, just to reiterate, there is an element of reporting. So management should encourage staff to speak in confidence about any concerns or give an anonymous option for recording concerns. So that's kind of like whistleblowing. So having a code of ethics within procurement is essential because it helps to guide, firstly, our behaviour. We know what we should or shouldn't do. And it can positively contribute to your reputation, protecting the company against any actions taken by its employees. It focuses on good practices and considers diversity such as culture, beliefs, and practices by all individuals. It will guide buyers through the procurement challenges because they might come up against things like human rights abuses, like modern day slavery, or the working conditions of staff, child labour, trafficking, and even paying fair pay. It covers things like the challenges around bribery, coercion, including conflicts of interests and attempts that suppliers might make to influence you as well. It covers movements such as fair trade and working with developing nations. And it covers environmental issues as well, like reducing pollution, renewable resources, and promoting sustainability. So one of the things I've mentioned a couple of times already is the ILO, which is the International Labour Organization. They are devoted to promoting social justice and internationally recognised human rights, pursuing its founding mission that social justice is essential for universal and lasting peace. So it's a formulation of international policies and programs to promote basic human rights and improve the living and working conditions, enhancing employment opportunities. You've got the creation of international labour standards, which are backed by a unique system to supervise the application. Extensive programs and international technical cooperation, which is formulated and implemented in an effective and active partnership with constituents to help countries put these policies into place in an effective manner. And training, education, and research activities help advance all of those efforts. So the ILO bring together the government, the employers, and the worker representatives of all their member states to set labour standards, develop policies, and devise programmes for decent work for all women and men. And in support of its goals, the International Labour Organization offers expertise and knowledge about the world of work, acquired by responding to the needs of the people everywhere for decent work, livelihood, and dignity. It serves in a variety of ways, including the formulation of international policies and programs, creation of international labour standards, an extensive programme of international technical cooperation and training, as well as education and research. So the International Labour Organization standards are legal instruments drawn up by the ILO. They're either conventions or protocols which are legally binding in international treaties that may be ratified by your member states, or recommendations which serve as non-binding guidelines. But in many cases, a convention lays down the basic principles to be implemented by the ratifying countries. And that's all while, a related recommendation supplements the conventions by providing more related guidance on how it could be applied. And they can be autonomous, not linked to the conventions. But there are 8 fundamental conventions covering subjects that are considered to be fundamental principles at work. So you've got things like the freedom of association. So, it shouldn't matter where where your background comes from. It shouldn't matter whether you join a union. Those things, are absolutely fine. It covers things like the right to collective bargaining. So if you are a member of a union, then those people can essentially buy, they can buy into the membership of a union. The unions can negotiate on their behalf. It talks about the elimination of any forced or compulsory labour and the effective abolition of child labour and the elimination of discrimination in respect of employment and occupation. And this is a tri-party structure of the ILO because it enables the 3 involved parties to have an equal voice within an organisation. So that is firstly the employees, the employers, and the governments. So have a quick look at the conventions on the screen. And as you can see, some of them date back all the way to the 1930s. So that's sort of nearly 100 years ago now. So been fighting for justice for quite a long time. So the purpose of the CIPS Code of Conduct is to define behaviours and actions which us CIPS members must commit to maintain as long as we are members of CIPS. So members of CIPS worldwide are required to uphold this code and to seek commitment as to all parties they engage with in their professional practice. And we should encourage our organisations as well to adopt an ethical procurement and supply policy that's based on the principles of this code and raise any matters of concerns relating to business ethics at an appropriate level within their organisation. And your conduct will be judged against this code, and any breach may lead to an action under disciplinary rules that are set out by the Institute's Royal Charter. So members are expected to assist any investigation by CIPS as well in the event of a complaint being made against them. So what it says that you should enhance and protect the standing of the profession by never engaging in conduct that would bring the Institute into disrepute. Don't accept inducements or gifts other than a nominal declared value that's sanctioned by your employer, and never allow offers of hospitality and gifts to influence your decisions. And always be aware of things that are kind of happening outside of work as well, because, if anyone was to come across you in your personal life doing things that are potentially illegal, it will probably reflect how they view you as a professional. The second part is to maintain the highest standards of integrity in our business relationships. So that's rejecting anything that you think is improper. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Never use your authority for personal gain. Ensure the information you give in the course of your work is accurate and not misleading. Never breach the confidentiality of the information you hold in your professional capacity. Always strive for genuine, fair competition and be truthful about your skills and knowledge. The third says to promote the eradication of unethical business practices, and this is about us fostering an awareness of issues like we're discussing today. So it's things like fraud, corruption, human rights abuses. We're responsible to say something and take action if we see something come to light. And we're also responsible for ensuring we do our due diligence and checks on our suppliers before we give them a contract. And finally, continue to develop your knowledge on that subject, because it is something that is changing. And also we need to make sure that we're keeping that, fresh in our mind. The fourth is to enhance the proficiency and stature of the profession by continuing to develop your knowledge and increase your skills. So even if once you get to level 6 and your MCIPS accredited, there's an expectation that you will still do continued professional development of a minimum of 30 hours a week, 30 hours a year, and you need to track that on your CPD log. It just means that your knowledge is up to date and relevant. You should foster the highest standards of those that you are responsible for. So if you have staff reporting to you, you need to lead by example and optimize the responsible use for those that you've got influence over. So don't be wasteful. And the last one is to ensure you fully comply with any laws and regulations, adhering to the laws of the country in which you practice, because CIPS is a global standard. I'm sure that I've got people watching this video from all over the world, and thank you very much for watching. I do appreciate my ability to reach every corner of the globe. But you will all have very different local laws. The good news is, of course, that once you're CIPS accredited, if you wanted to go and work in another country in the world, you can take your CIPS qualification with you and it will be recognised. But just make sure you brush up on the local laws that affect the sort of industry that you work in. Always fulfil your contractual obligations and follow the CIPS guidelines at all times. So moving on to 3.2, this is broken down into 3 subsections. We're going to look at topics included in procedures for procurement. So sort of things like responsibilities, regulations for competition, levels of delegated authority, responsibility at different stages of the sourcing process, invoice and payments. We're going to look at the use of procurement policies, strategies and manuals, and the involvement of internal functions and personnel in the procurement process. So in any procurement department, there has to be a procurement procedure. And this is a group of directives that detail what can and can't be done, as well as how each of those activities must be undertaken. So most companies will publish their procurement policies so that all can see them. It's not only companies that have procurement procedures, governments do, local governments, and even countries have them as well. So these are rules and regulations that keep purchasing legal and appropriate. So some of the aspects is things like responsibilities, who can make decisions. I say competition regulations, do you need to follow OJU or public contract regs? Who can delegate authority in terms of budgets? Who does what? And how can invoices get approved? So procurement in some organisations is managed through a system of delegated authority. Delegated procurement authority is governed by monetary threshold limits. So heads of business units may further subdelegate procurement authority to their staff in writing while retaining overall responsibility. But records for all staff within procurement authority should indicate the scope and duration of their delegated responsibility. So you can see here an example. If the tender is estimated to be more than $10,000, you can do it if you are what does it say? Job titles that do not have the authority as a junior buyer or an expediter. And if it isn't above 10,000, and these people do have the authority. So it kind of says who can do what, depending on the value. Okay. So competition regulations will aim to control monopolistic, unfair and restrictive trade practices by creating a set of policies that enhance competition or competitive outcomes in markets. So these competition policies are intended to promote efficiency, maximise consumer welfare, and to help the creation of business environments which are based on fairness, which leads to efficient resource allocation in which abuse of market power is prevented or curbed. But these policies usually include relaxed industry policies or, liberated trade policies, conducive entry and exit conditions, or reduced controls and greater reliance on market forces. There are official bodies within businesses that aim to ensure that competition is, competitive and fair. So you get examples like Ofcom, which is a comms communications regulator. You've got Ofgem that look at gas and electricity. You've got Ofwat, which looks at water and wastewater, and the OOR, which is the road and railway. Sorry, I should have shown you this slide to explain that. That's just some of the logos. But yeah, some of the policies will be like intellectual property. So that will prevent copying ideas. So you might have like something registered by an inventor. So you can't use that invention for a period of time. You've then got cartels. So this will prevent suppliers coming together and fixing supply to sort of prevent, competitive tension. They do face very, large legal fines. You've got merger controls. So this controls mergers within businesses to maintain competition. And then you've got monopolies to avoid one company of having sole control. So policies and procedures are derived from an organisation strategy. Your strategy is a plan that's formulated by senior managers within an organisation that set out what an organisation plans to achieve over a period of time. So an organisation's procurement strategy may be based on various factors like achieving cost reductions or, value for money or encouraging local supply. It could be about environmental issues, ethical improvements, fair trade. It could be implementing just in time, improving quality, reducing the number of suppliers, increasing your sustainability. So yeah, there's quite a lot really when you think about it that could be involved in a sort of procurement strategy, whereas your policy is more about the guiding principles that show directions within an organisation. So the policies commonly include things like competition and ethics, KPIs, quality again, supply appraisals and evaluation, as well as sustainability and transparency. And then the last thing is the procedure, which outlines the methods for undertaking a task. And a procurement department will often have a manual that outlines the procedure for each task. So here are some of the advantages and disadvantages of having sort of policies, strategies, and manuals. It will provide guidance. It means that we're, doing things in a very similar way, which gives us continuity. It will promote ethical behaviour, retain control, reduce the risks. It means we're treating all suppliers fairly, which is a good thing, giving us procurement credibility. And it prevents non-procurement team members from sourcing and buying, giving procurement focus, and it forms part of our corporate governance. But the downside is it may impact on innovation, it may restrict your supply base, and everyone uses the same technique and tactic. The buyer loses their individuality and their own sort of style and flair, and relationships within the supply chain become quite formal, and suppliers may resent having to conform. Now, where procurement strategies are affected by change, we need to kind of understand change and how we sort of make change happen and everything else. Kurt Lewin developed a change model involving 3 steps for change. It's about unfreezing the current state, making that change happen, and then having to refreeze, which means that the new way of working is very clearly cemented. So for Lewin, the process of change entails creating the perception that a change is needed, then moving towards the new and desired level of behaviour, and then finally solidifying that so the behaviour becomes the norm. But there are 2 different types of changes. You've got incremental change, which can be thought of as a process that modifies, adjusts, and refines the status quo via relatively simple and minor changes. So it's based on a, definition that it's important to emphasise that this kind of an organisational change is referred to as first order change. It doesn't necessarily alter all the organisation's core. Incremental change, refers to relatively minor adjustments in the grand scheme of things to pre-existing systems and hierarchies, as well as models, products, services, and processes. Whereas the radical step change refers to a significant shift behind the fundamentals of a company practice, whether it's its products, its cultures, or its norms. If you're going to make this happen, you will need a cross-functional team, which is a group of people from different functional expertise to work together to a common goal. And that could be people from procurement, finance, marketing, operations, or even HR. But typically it will include employees from all levels at organisations. So some examples of interactions with internal stakeholders and functions could be, us receiving requisitions from them, receiving sales forecasts from the sales team, liaising with departments so economies of scale can be achieved by buying in bulk, or reporting financial budgets, demonstrating value for money, or communicating changes to components from suppliers to production and sales. So you can see how, all of these different functions can be involved in our procurement processes. So moving on to 3.3, this is the role and status of procurement and supply chain management within different organisations. 3.3.2 is looking at centralised and decentralised. And then finally, 3.3.3 is the use of hybrids. So first and foremost, the role of procurement in meeting customers' needs is about, answering the phone and emails promptly and courteously. Always make promises you can deliver on, never make fake promises, delivering good and bad news honestly, encouraging feedback, resolving complaints efficiently and effectively, and always be willing and helpful and polite. Because if you think about a time when you've received good customer service, you can then compare that to when you've had bad customer service, what went well, what didn't go well. We're also, another role of ours is to get value for money. So that's not about achieving the lowest price, but it's about achieving the optimum combination of whole life cost and quality. And traditionally, value for money was thought of as getting the right quality in the right quantity at the right time from the right supplier at the right price. And this concept has been a little bit updated to get better quality of goods and services in a more, suitable quantity just in time and, only when needed from better suppliers at prices that continue to improve. So to help achieve value for money, goods and services should be acquired by competition unless there's a convincing reason not to do so. So the form of competition should be appropriate to the complexity of that procurement, and the barriers of the participation of the suppliers should be removed. In practices, the level of competition is indicated by the estimated value of the proposed procurement. It's worth pointing out, I think I mentioned in an earlier video, maybe it was, I'm not sure if it's in Learning Outcome 4 or Learning Outcome 2, but I mentioned that the Procurement Act is coming in for public sector in the UK. It's coming into effect in October 2024. But again, one of the roles we have in procurement is to make sure that we're complying with any regulations. So at the moment it's public contract regs, but it will become the Procurement Act in October 2024. So as you can see from this diagram, centralized procurement can leverage scale and drive compliance, while devolved structures can be close to business needs and help nurture innovation. And a hybrid centre-led approach is possible, but organisations must ensure that the right type of reliable supplier and spend and performance data is available to support the central team. And procurement governance tends to be centralised during difficult times and more devolved in growth periods. Procurement leadership would be wise to build structures flexible enough to adapt quickly to the changing needs, and using appropriate key performance indicators to monitor procurement operations and ensure it is delivering according to corporate objectives, which may change as the business environment fluctuates. Yeah, so some are fully centralised, some are fully devolved, and others adopt a combination of the two, which we call a hybrid. So centralised procurement allows the enterprise to leverage total corporate spend and drive standardised sourcing processes throughout the organisation. The resulting economies of scale will allow the company to yield a full power of their spend, enhance operational efficiencies, and improve knowledge sharing and best practice execution. Decentralized procurement empowers individual business units, giving them some kind of control over their process and design decisions. Decentralized procurement doesn't allow the company to leverage their total spend or align business units' objectives with those of the enterprise. There's very little coordination or knowledge shared between those divisions and specifications, and the supplier's performance are often very inconsistent. So in a death blow of the most fundamental procurement mandate, operating costs are unnecessarily high because of the lack of standardization and volume leveraged buy-in. So centralized procurement will promote the economies of scale, get more efficient use of skills, resources, and reduce expenses. But the downside is that when you're, putting all of your eggs in one basket, the order sizes get a lot bigger, which means it's difficult to buy from your local suppliers. You do get more bureaucracy because the values are higher and less accountability, sometimes lack of control. So the advantage here in terms of decentralized procurement will allow for fewer overheads, duplication of staff efforts, and resulting costs are negated, and all activities are standardized. And many staff no longer have the time to spend on low-level ad hoc purchasing and volume procurement, which means that better prices, greater discounts, and are more available if you centralize. So volume deliveries cut down on delivery charges and staffing costs to move and goods to store. And computerized systems can be used nowadays to automate a lot of this work, as well as integrate the purchasing systems and accounting, as well as stock control. But centralized records can be kept of all purchases. But this means that purchase requisitions for ad hoc goods have to be sent from another area of the purchasing department, causing delays and sometimes irritations. And if the company is geographically diverse, it may not be able to take advantage of local discounts. Conversely, with a small company, it may not be cost effective to have staff and a computer system that only deals with purchasing. So if you can see it's a large company that's not too geographically dispersed, the advantages generally outweigh the disadvantages. So the good thing about decentralized is you get direct communication with the supplier, possibly faster delivery because you're using local suppliers, fewer procedures, and then the people that are essentially using those products and services end up with more specialist knowledge. But the downside is because you're breaking the volumes down into smaller parcels, the prices are unlikely to be very competitive. You won't get the economies of scale, and you've got several relationships which are not necessarily valued in a strategic way. These local, local offices might not think about things like the total cost of ownership or the environmental side, and it detracts from your core activities. There's always a higher risk of fraud and embezzlement as well. So you can look at a hybrid structure. There are 4 types of hybrid structures that are used within procurement. The first is a consortium, when an organisation with the same needs collaborate for the mutual benefit. You've got shared services, is when an organisation centralises its support functions. And a lead buyer structure, which is when an organisational department takes the responsibility for purchasing a specific product or service like IT or facilities. Or you can outsource your procurement when some of your organisational activities are conducted by a third party, like low-level tendering or something. So there are varying hybrid structures within procurement and supply chains, but the hybrid ones are a mix of centralised and decentralised structures. So this is showing you what a consortium looks like. So it can be defined as 2 or more independent organisations that join together, either formally or informally, or through an independent third party. And it's all for the purpose of combining their individual spend and requirements to leverage a better price or a better service. But purchasing consortiums go by the name. They include purchasing groups, group purchasing organisations, federal organisations for purchasing, and international purchasing organisations. But they all have the same goals, and the differences are mainly in their structure, whether they're vertically focused or a modus operandi. So the types of consortia can be very loose, so again, informal, lack of formal structure. They can be voluntary, which again, is a little bit more of a formal structure, but it's where, you're buying on behalf of others. A regional one is where they cluster together in the same region. You can have some profit-making ones who set them up for the point, they take a share, as you say, of whatever gets bought through them. Member-owned ones, so it'll include buying groups. You have to actually be a member of that consortium to actually buy from that consortia. And then there are some not-profit ones as well. So the good side is that you do get economies of scale. It will, you'll get additional negotiating skills from the consortia, lower prices, reducing your workload, maybe even improvements of best practice and shared knowledge, enhancing the quality and lowering the risk. But I guess the downside is that you reduce your control. You might get a little bit of internal conflict. It reduces competition, increase the lead times, and you lose the supplier relationship. Shared services are commonly used for things like HR, admin, ICT, and finance. So objectives of shared services is to create uniformity in policies, procedures, and standards, to create continuous improvement and to save costs while improving the quality of the services that that are being provided. It's used by some local authorities in the UK in order to reduce costs, and shared services is the consolidation of your business operations that are used by multiple parts of the same organisation. And they're cost efficient because they centralise back office operations that are used by multiple divisions in the same company, and they eliminate redundancy. So some companies use a chargeback system to build divisions that use the service on a per use or per quarter or per year basis. But other companies absorb the cost of their shared service as part of their continued cost of running the business. But today, most companies will employ a shared service model for finance, HR, and IT. So the advantages is that you will reduce costs. It will provide with a high level of skill and knowledge, puts the focus on your core activities and pooling your resources, avoiding duplication of work, and information can be held in one central location. But the downside is departmental confidentiality risk is increased. There's sometimes a resistance to change from the workforce, and new processes and procedures may take time to adapt or adopt. And auditing becomes more challenging, and information is not always readily available within the departments. So I think I've gone through those advantages and disadvantages already. So a key feature of the lead buyer role is that they're not a procurement professional and are employed by the function like, marketing or IT. So will require support and guidance from the central procurement team. And if implemented effectively, it can improve relationships and communication between procurement and the user departments and help to spread purchase best practice throughout the organisation. So essentially, your responsibilities are delegated to a lead buyer. Like I say, it could be the IT department responsible for buying all IT equipment for every department in your business. So the individuals within procurement can develop their skills. Economy of scales can still be achieved because you're consolidating all the volume into one. It will reduce workload compared with devolved procurement strategy. The downside is if a department has no procurement knowledge, the prices will not be competitive. They might not suit all parties. Increase the workload compared with centralized strategy. It can, you might get ethical codes of conduct being breached, reduce control, increase risk, and the same suppliers may get multiple orders, which could have been, collated to reduce those costs. So outsourcing is when an external provider carries out a service that has previously been carried out in-house by your organisation's own resources. That could be things like cleaning and catering and things like that. The procurement activity can also be outsourced, and they can work along other strategies, whether it's a centralised, devolved, or a consortium structure. So procurement can be outsourced by very large or small organisations for different reasons. So small organisations might just lack the internal knowledge, and it might not, they don't, spend a huge amount of money, so it doesn't make sense for them to employ someone on a full-time permanent basis. But some multinational organisations believe that outsourcing some of their activities, like the what we call the TAO spend, will enable them to focus on their core activities while saving resources and maximising profits. So you can get cost reductions, reduce your training costs, lower headcount, so you need fewer staff of your own, economies of scale, and access potentially to highly skilled buyers. The downside is changing from internal to outsourced procurement could be quite difficult in terms of employee relations. You have a bit of lack of control because the outsourcing provider is running the process for you, and the provider still needs to be managed. Could be technology problems with integration of your company systems, reliance to change from internal staff, resistance to change, redundancies in the current procurement team, continuity of supply and supplier relationships, and a reliance on the success of another organisation. Now, the importance of interacting with people and building rapport in centralised, decentralised, and hybrid structures shouldn't be underestimated, because in business, building rapport plays a prime role. An excellent rapport will manifest excellent communication, which helps to better negotiate. And by being communicative, attentive, responsive, and approachable, professionals can build rapport with suppliers and gain a competitive advantage over the decision making. But in business, building rapport plays a prime role. Excellent rapport manifests excellent communication, and that helps us to negotiate better. But rapport doesn't come naturally. It's progressive and it builds up over time. And a lot of it is strongly linked to trust. So you can see the diagram on the left-hand side, which is the trust matrix, which shows, how trust can be established between procurement and other stakeholders. And it comes down to the thought of, does procurement actually care about what they're doing and the outcomes? And do they have the capabilities and competence to do the job? So ways in which you can build rapport is to, demonstrate positive body language, make eye contact, listen and use positive gestures and emphasis, ask questions, be empathetic, respect all ideas, remove any preconceptions, be honest, and justify your opinions and feedback, because this will help the other party to empathise and it continues to contribute towards rapport. So the last bit we're going to look at is the common IT systems that can be used. So 3.4 is broken down into the P2P systems, systems for inventory management. You've then got ERP, communication systems for internal and external use, and then again systems for sourcing, tendering and auctions, which we might have seen in Learning Outcome 2. So the purchase to pay process, also known as the P2P process, connects the procurement and the entire supply chain process within a company through the through the goods receipting process, and finally to the payment issued to the supplier. But in addition to reducing overall supply chain and inventory costs, improving the purchase to pay process can add visibility and allow management the opportunity to have better communication with the vendor as to where the suppliers or where the items are in that delivery process and payments to that supplier. So there's a lot of benefits to it. You can sort of reduce the waste, errors and costs. You get a faster payment, continuous improvement and better relationships. I always look at this like a game of tennis. It's like the buyer puts the ball across the net to the supplier puts the ball back, so it keeps going backwards and forwards until payment is made. Within the P2P systems, a lot of the way that they're designed is to try to eliminate waste within the process rather than physical waste. And a model that you might be familiar with from your previous studies is the 7 Waste by Tashio Ono, which is sometimes referred to as TIMWOOD. That's actually been updated. You can see there's 8 wastes that we're looking on the screen here. You've got the original TIM and wood, but they've just put this additional one in, which is about unused talent. So defects, products, not meeting the expectations, overproduction, producing more than you can sell, waiting for a process to happen, which obviously if you streamline it, that's going to be a lot better. Unused talent is underutilizing people's skills and knowledge. Transport, waste of time in moving things around. Inventory, holding too much inventory potentially. Motion, waste of time and effort in additional process and movement. And then extra processing, doing extra to it, putting a bow around it or something. It's just not necessary. So we've got some other terms here on which show how technology might be involved in running purchase to pay, from the issuing of specs to the receiving of tenders and bids, and through the use of contracts, receiving goods and facilitating payment. So ICT can be used in the purchase to pay element of procurement, such as using EDI, which is sharing of data and information across your systems. You've got online track and trace, which is an automated tracking of goods using tools like radio frequency ID and GPS. You've got expediting by exception, which is an automated process to deliver most transactions with exceptions highlighted for, manual intervention. You then got receipt and inspection, so the scanning and automated logging of goods rather than manual checking and entry. There's electronic payment, transferring funds electronically. You've even got contract management systems, which makes the process of working with suppliers, managing their relationships, a lot easier. And then you've got database information as well, using data to drive activity and tracking by using database storage. So MRP is a materials requirement planning system, which is used as part of another application of technology. And the MRP system uses the information provided by your management information system, your bill of materials, and inventory files to explode or cascade the end product into various assemblies, sub-assemblies, or components at different levels. You notice the system starts with orders and forecast orders, which then feed into a master production schedule. Hence why multiple data feeds are needed from various parts of your organization, and it has to work efficiently and effectively. And here we can see a range of integrated tasks performed by your inventory control and IT systems. And many organizations using technology-based systems to control their warehousing and managing their stock. And the system is linked to other functions for planning purposes. So it's important that any system introduced into the warehouse and stock control will achieve the required requirements. And capturing goods inwards information accurately and integrating this information with your stock balances and contract management and payment systems will be really helpful, as well as recording your stock movements and their locations. Translating issues relating into stock picking and packing tasks. Maintaining stock balances and stock variations. Triggering automated replenishment requisitions. Monitoring productivity and utilization. Maintaining stock integrity. Producing evidence of stock movements for invoice verification and audit trails, and producing management reports used by any or all of the data that you can see on the screen. So this shows the evolution of MRP into ERP. So MRP started in the 1970s, and it was purely just about master production scheduling, bills of materials, and inventory tracking. MRP2 came along in the 1980s, which then added the machine capabilities, demand forecasting. You've even got quality assurance, general accounting. And then in the 1990s, ERP came along. And this is where we started seeing it integrating with all other functions across the business. So you've got procurement, you've got HR, you've got sales, CRM, HRM, everything's basically all in one system. It's one sort of one central data warehouse. Okay, just in time is a cost accounting purchase strategy. So you purchase goods so that they're delivered just and when they're needed to meet that customer demand. So with just in time, when you get customer orders, you plan purchases, you purchase the minimum number of items to meet that customer demand, and you purchase all your purchasing typically results in more smaller orders and frequent deliveries. So the goal of just in time is to reduce the carrying cost of the inventory. Less inventory on hand means you pay less in storage and less in insurance. JIT also requires less cash in the short term as well. There are several benefits to just in time, but there are also risks. So you need to manage the process carefully. If you don't, you may have stock outs, and stock outs can lead to lost businesses, both short term and long term. Kanban is a visual system for managing work as it moves through a process, and it visualizes both the process and the actual work passing through the process. And the goal of Kanban is to identify potential bottlenecks in your process and fix them so work can flow through it cost effectively at an optimal speed or throughput. Now, a Kanban system ideally controls the entire value chain from the supplier to the end consumer. In this way, it helps avoid supply disruptions and overstocking of goods at various stages of the manufacturing process. But it requires continuous monitoring of the processes, particularly when you give attention to avoid bottlenecks that could slow down the production process. So the aim is to achieve high throughput with lower delivery times. Overall, Kanban can become an efficient way in a variety of production systems. So this is an example of how technology can be used for an inventory management system. So the principle here is that there are two batches of stock called here bin 1 and bin 2, which is where the stock that is needed can be used and taken from. There would be an automated reordering point for bin 2 that placed an order with the supplier for a restock. So if bin 2 runs out of stock, then bin 1 is available. And then when the new stock arrives, bin 1 is stocked up and the first, then bin 2. And essentially, there's always plenty available. This is not a lean system, as it might mean more stock is maintained than is actually required, but it allows for late deliveries of stock or where more stock, than had been planned is needed to be used. So the type of automated ordering system used here would be via an extranet or an EDI system between the buyer and the supplier. Now, data science is a collection and curating of mass data for analysis, where the artificial intelligence is implementing this data in machine to understanding this data. So data science is a collection of skills such as statistic techniques, where artificial intelligence looks at algorithms. So data analytics leads naturally to predictive analytics, and that's used for collecting data to predict what might happen. So predictions are based on historical data and rely on a little bit of human interaction. So you can query data, validate patterns, create and then test assumptions. So artificial intelligence is not a new concept. The technology has been with us for a long time, but what's changed in recent years is the power of computing, cloud-based service options, and the application of artificial intelligence. So having systems for inventory management has some positives and negatives. So the good news is that it will speed up your processes, reduce your errors, increase control, and aid that traceability. It means you're not relying on human input and there's no distortion of communication. And any sort of receipt of a message can actually be tracked. The downside, though, is relationships may suffer. It's impersonal and it could result in job losses. It's costly to implement and you need a lot of IT support. You could have power failures, which may cause the system to crash. And emails may be open to interpretation as well. Now, your ERP, which is the successor to MRP, as we've already seen, is defined as the ability to deliver an integrated suite of business applications. So ERP tools share a common process and data model which covers a broad and deep operational end-to-end process, such as all those found in finance, HR, distribution, manufacturing, service and sourcing in that supply chain. So ERP applications automate and support a range of administrative and operational business processes. And that's across multiple industries, including line of business, customer facing, admin, and asset management aspects of an enterprise. But the ERP developments are complex and expensive endeavors. Some organizations struggle to define their business benefits. So in terms of module elements for ERP, you see it having things like, the ability to raise requisitions, send purchase orders, create and send them, should I say. You've got delivery of purchase orders, invoice payments, contract management, supplier relationship management, as well as supplier databases and supplier evaluation. So communication forms an important part of procurement functions. It contributes to a number of things like, I suppose, agreeing specifications, supplier relationship management, customer services, conflict resolution, expediting, supplier performance management, and contract management. So emails is the most common way to communicate when we're sending out requests for quotes, requesting samples, arranging meetings, or even sharing KPIs. So historically, comms between two people has evolved in more recent years. So we've got things like machine to human, human to machine, or even machine to machine. So machine to machine is usually based on a SIM card through the internet or a mobile telephone from one machine to another. And this type of technology is referred to IoT, which is Internet of Things. And there are some advantages and disadvantages of using IT systems to communicate. So the good side is it will speed up the processes, reduce your errors, increase your control, aid your traceability. It means you're not relying on human input, which means there's no distortion of communication. And as I said earlier, receipts of any messages can be tracked. But downside is relationships can suffer. It's impersonal, sometimes job losses, because obviously the machine takes over what a human might do. It's costly to implement. And you might need support systems as well. You've got power failures, which may cause the systems to crash, and emails may be open to interpretation. Now, electronic sourcing can take a number of forms. You've got e-tenders, you've got e-requisitioning, you've got e-auctions, and you've also got e-catalogues. So e-requisitioning, this shows the process flow. So requisition is raised, and what generally happens is there's a kind of a point where you can go straight from requisition to order if it sits below a certain threshold. So in this example, it's referring to $2,000. So it will go straight to a purchase order. But if it's over 2,000 and up to 1,000, then a low-level approval might be needed. And then if it goes over 1,000, let's say a high-level approval might be needed as well. In terms of e-catalogues, they're quite useful. It's a bit like an Amazon experience because when you log on to your company intranet, you can see the products that are available under the contracts they've put in place. And it's accessible at the click of a button. You can look at it from various perspectives, different angles, different colors, different designs. It's live information, so you can see what's in stock and what isn't in stock. Inventory levels, they're there, and you get a little bit more detail. It might show you the size, the shape, anything really, I suppose. Now, e-auctions are, they're not new. If you think about eBay is, in theory, a version of e-auctions where you sell something and there's one seller and multiple buyers, and the winner is the highest bidder. With procurement auctions, everything gets turned in reverse because instead of having one seller and multiple buyers, you have one buyer and multiple sellers. And actually, price starts high and comes down. So that's your kind of English reverse auction. That's not to say you can't do forward auctions. Some organizations sell off, redundant stock. There are also Japanese auctions, Dutch auctions, and weighted auctions, which take account of price and non-price factors. So the good thing is that it reduces the time you spend manually negotiating with suppliers. There's no need for face-to-face negotiations, and you can enhance your savings due to suppliers, constantly reducing their bids to win. There's opportunities to interact with larger volumes of suppliers and for them to gain information about the competitor. The downside is there's possibility of technical issues which are a disadvantage. It can be impersonal. Suppliers may end up bidding lower than they wanted to, which might make it difficult in terms of economic viability. Lack of relationship with suppliers, and suppliers may lose a competitive edge. So e-tendering or e-sourcing will include the development of e-specs, sending out RFQs and ITTs to selected suppliers, e-negotiation, whether that be via an auction or otherwise, preparing and sending out a contract, and even evaluating suppliers. So in terms of benefits benefits of e-tendering, you will get process efficiencies, a little bit more consistent in the way you do stuff. The technology kind of safeguards you, so it will automatically reject things that are after the deadline and so on and so forth. It's environmentally friendly. It kind of frees up time, promotes cross-functionality. Sometimes the system can actually screen some of the bids. So if you put in a kind of pass-fail criteria and they've answered the question in a way that would mean that they failed, the system will kind of down select them for you to prevent you from taking through an unsuitable supplier. You've then got things like, bids can be stored in a sort of cloud-based system. It reduces the risk, gives you more assurance. It's easy for people to audit. You get a consistency in process and, of course, a bit of a far more transparent process as well. So that's the end of Learning Outcome 3. Quite a long one, this one. A very big chapter. It covers lots of different possible subjects. But yeah, that was Level 4 Module 1 for 2023 syllabus, Learning Outcome 3. Thank you so much for watching and wish you a lovely day.